Welcome into the beginning of the week here on Tobacco Road Sports Radio. It's the Desmond Johnson Show live across multiple media platforms. Make sure you rate and subscribe over at the YouTube channel, youtube.com/at Tobacco Road Sports Radio. David Glenn in with me. He's in every other week with me, co-hosting the latest and the greatest stuff going on in North Carolina. Brendan Marks from The Athletic joining us today so we can get everything Carolina, everything Duke that you guys have been wanting to know going into basketball. Starts in 3 weeks, if I'm not mistaken. It's like right around the corner, and we got to tackle this football thing first. Bill Belichick came on and did his press conference yesterday, and I'm not quite sure how many people really bought what he was trying to sell. We'll get into the nuts and bolts of that and with the latest, what these two gentlemen have heard regarding that situation here, and much, much more. It's the Desmond Johnson Show. Let's go ahead and roll that intro.
Live with Desmond Johnson, son, the live is one. Represent NC to the fullest.
Yeah, welcome to the Carolinas. Everywhere you go, the sky is Carolina blue, the finest. Live action, feedback, the city needs that. I've been number one, no cap. Here's the recap. Adrenaline is my addiction. I'm about to relapse. Step on the turf if you won't and get your weed whacked. I'm going harder than a martyr on the starter end. It's the heart of man, that's a rap like a cardigan. I'm breaking records, it's 4th and inches, I count the seconds. The over-under's my roar of thunder, my secret weapon. Yeah, the game is to be told. I don't break, I break modes. Follow me on Tobacco Road.
Live with Desmond Johnson, son, the live is one. Represent NC to the fullest.
And again, welcome into the Desmond Johnson Show here on Tobacco Road Sports Radio, tobaccoroadsportsradio.com. You can hear the best of the week on terrestrial radio across the triad, WWBG 1470 AM every Friday at 6 p.m., as well as WTOB 980 AM, 96.7 FM. That's Winston-Salem, and that's also Greensboro. You can hear it at 6 o'clock every Friday. Brendan Marks joining us here from The Athletic. Beat writer for North Carolina and Duke Athletics. And we're going to start off on the football side and the big story. Both of you guys were at ACC Media Days last week down in Charlotte for basketball, but it felt like the dominant talk. I was watching Joe Ovies walk around with his phone doing stuff, little shorts or whatnot. And the main buzz felt like it had to do with Bill Belichick and the buzz regarding him possibly getting bought out or accepting a buyout or whatever it may be, to leave the dumpster fire that's become North Carolina football. It's strange. I call it a dumpster fire as if Carolina's been like this top college football team and now they've fallen apart. They've only won the ACC. What is it, DG? Like 5 times or something like that in like 70 years or something crazy.
It's been since 1980. It hasn't happened since 1980.
So it's not like we're sitting here like, oh man, what's happened to Carolina football? If anything, they've gotten more exposure. Maybe not the kind they wanted, but more exposure than they've really ever had as a Carolina football program. Brendan, start us off here from what you were hearing during ACC Media Days and going into yesterday's press conference with Belichick denying there's any buyout or anything going on. What's the latest that you're hearing about the situation at Carolina? Is he correct that he's planning to be here for the long term, or are you hearing things and seeing things that are contrary to that?
Yeah, no, at this point, I would be shocked if he doesn't finish out the year as coach. And quite frankly, right now, the way things stand, I'd say it is more likely than not that he's back next season in North Carolina. The fact of the matter is UNC does not have the money to make him go away. It would cost $20 million at the end of this year to buy him out. Most of his staff, actually every member of his staff except for one assistant coach, is on multiple year guaranteed contracts. So it would cost another $10 million to buy out his staff. Oh. And of course, that's before you actually go and, hire a new coach and their whole staff, potentially pay a buyout for them. And then the thing that I think everybody's forgetting is this is $13 million invested in this roster from a revenue sharing perspective. Clearly the product in the field is not good enough. You're going to do that all over again too. So financially, North Carolina has already put its chips in the center and it's kind of got to let it fall where it will still. The other thing that I would say as far as the likelihood of him being back is a lot of really powerful and important people at the university, members of the board of trustees. We've documented that at The Athletic. The chancellor, Lee Roberts. A lot of these people have gone out of their way to make sure that Bill Belichick was in Chapel Hill, and they are not going to just admit that they were wrong about this whole thing. There is an ego aspect here too. There is a power player aspect here too. So I think you put those two things together. Clearly the product on the field is bad right now. The schedule, yes, it's soft, but it doesn't look like there's a lot of wins left out there for the taking for them. I think probably the most likely outcome in terms of actual quote unquote changes would be maybe you see some staff changes later on in the year, maybe by the end of the year. But it's not like he's going to fire the defensive coordinator, his son, is he? So there are only so many scapegoats in town. Unfortunately, you put all that together, it looks more likely than not to me that he is going to finish out this year as UNC's head coach. And depending on how that goes, if UNC can swallow the financial, bullet that it would take to get rid of him after the season.
So you're saying Carolina doesn't have that Penn State money where they can just, pay out $50 million to send James Franklin on his way, which that's the weirdest situation I've ever seen in college football. They were the number 2 team in the country, 3 weeks ago? They go from that to Franklin's out, $50 million out the door. They still got half a season to play here. And Penn State's just in a free fall. Carolina apparently not willing to do that. David Glenn from the North Carolina Sports Network here with us also as well. DG, do you agree pretty much what Brennan's saying logistically, the legalese of getting out of it, the money part of it? I didn't even think about all the assistant coaches on guaranteed deals as well. It seems like they're stuck with each other, and it doesn't seem like both parties are happy with it. What was the vibe at ACC Media Day? What were you hearing before we heard the press conference yesterday from Belichick?
Well, one thing I reminded a lot of folks when I was a guest on their shows in the middle of the chaos was that, as Brendan outlined extremely well, a lot of folks were either ignoring, forgetting, or underplaying the money factor. And it's just a bad idea to not follow the money in all of these modern college athletics circumstances and situations. Carolina is not going to pay a $30 million buyout for the reasons that Brendan outlined. I've always found that, the old saying, it takes two to tango. I believe as we speak, the Bill Belichick half of the equation is infinitely harder to predict over, let's say, this next year and a half than the UNC side of the equation. UNC ain't paying $30 million for people to not coach. It's not going to happen. Some private booster would have to step forward with the biggest. That would be the largest buyout by a public university in the history of our state by a million miles. It's just not going to happen.
Like Michael Jordan money or something.
The way the money is involved. Now, that's one half of the it takes two to tango. The Bill Belichick half, man, your guess is as good as mine. The man's own family members have said on the record they're worried about him for various reasons, including, a girlfriend literally 1/3 of his age. Everybody can make their own judgments about that. But when people close to you say, man, I'm not really sure what Bill's doing here. Why is he picking fights with the Patriots when they say that he is welcome back there? Why is he dating somebody 1/3 of his age? You want to predict what that man's going to do in this context? Good luck with that, man. Would he walk away at the end of the year? He's a competitive guy. Just as Brendan correctly pointed out, other competitive people are not going to walk away from this at the UNC side. Bill's a competitive guy. He's not at Carolina. I know there's a minority thinking, he and Lombardi took this job just to get one more big fat paycheck and they're defrauding UNC. That's a bunch of baloney. Bill Belichick is fundamentally emptying his personal effort bucket to try to win football games. And I believe him when he says he enjoys college football coaching. But could he walk away at the end of this year? I mean, if he had a landing place, who knows? But unless Bill walks away, this is going to be a 2-year experiment at Carolina where at the end of year 2, there would be a more interesting financial decision. But maybe Bill Belichick has a better year 2 than year 1. And I would think he does make staff changes, and he does have some conversations with his GM, Mike Lombardi, who did not do a good job of picking the groceries and to steal that old Parcells line so that Bill could be, the chef that puts the meal together.
It's like he went to Whole Foods and bought all this expensive groceries and got back to the house, and it's all just plain bags of sugar. It's no, all of it's the same. None of it's any different. And that's the thing that's different for me as a fan. Even with Mac Brown won. I don't think he didn't win less than 6 games a season when he came back the second time around. And he always had some guys, some standout stars like Drake May or whoever, somebody that kind of, and they'd be in-state too. It'd usually be somebody from in-state, like a Travis Shaw or somebody like that, where you knew they were coming in. Yeah, Omarion Hampton, someone you knew coming in, and they stood out. And now they're maybe playing on Sunday. I don't know if there's a player on this team that I can picture playing on Sunday. I barely can see them playing on Saturday because some of the way they're playing, like this is, I don't get a chance to watch Carolina football as much as I'd like to because people know Tobacco Road, we're the broadcasting partner for North Carolina A&T. So my Saturdays are usually sitting there producing A&T football. But if they're playing a good team or a good matchup, I'll turn on and watch it. I put on that Clemson game for like the first, I don't know. It was very evident early that that was not going to be a fun game to watch. So I did not put myself through it. But the buyout part of it for me is the thing that's tripping me up because people are like, well, Belichick could just take his buyout. It's $1 million. He's doing the school a favor. Why would he do that? Like, why would he give up $30 million to get Carolina out of this? Basically admit it was wrong to hire him and just go home with his tail tucked between his legs with $1 million. Like, if anything, he's going to sit there and go through a 1-10 season and take his $30 million and force the school to do something before he'll do it on his own to benefit the school. So that, I don't know, just where do you guys see this team landing by the end of this year? Because I don't think they're getting any better as it goes along.
Yeah, I mean, basically, I mean, what DG said is totally true. You know, Lombardi's roster construction, you know, is just it was inherently flawed. And, you know, we had a report at The Athletic last week where Chandler Morris, who's having great success at Virginia, was interested in coming to North Carolina. And, you know, Lombardi's sentiment was basically, you're never going to make it in the NFL. I'm not interested. Well, it turns out you don't have to make it in the NFL to be a good college football player. That, I think, is the biggest issue that I have heard of, that we have heard of at The Athletic behind the scenes as far as this whole thing is concerned, strictly from a football perspective. Belichick and Lombardi had a fundamental misunderstanding of what it takes to be good in college football. It is not the same thing as it is at the NFL level. The concepts, the schemes, they're all different. The actual like physical makeup. Everybody who gets to the NFL was a really, really good college player. But the gap in college talent discrepancies is a very real thing. And UNC tried to bargain shop, especially along the offensive line. You know, we talked to one coach of a team who's played UNC this year, and they said that UNC's offensive line was, quote, not competitive. You know, I don't think you need an anonymous quote. You just turn on the tape, watch for 5 minutes. That's pretty apparent. Like, you know, if you're kind of looking down their schedule, Stanford at home is maybe a winnable game. You know, Wake Forest is maybe a winnable game, although I'd say that's much more of a coin toss than I would have said before the season. Like, it is an uphill battle to bowl eligibility. I think for this team to make it to a bowl would be a tremendous accomplishment. It is not something that I would predict or project for them. You know, and again, I think it'll be a difference, you know, give them a full off season maybe. The transfer portal was already open when he and Lombardi were hired. They did have somewhat of a limited pool of players. I do buy that argument. The recruiting, they said they want to bring in 40 high schoolers. They sent a letter to donors. You know, we'll see what the quality of the class winds up being. But right now, for the rest of this season, it is hard to have a lot of optimism about where this team is going.
And then,
and I'll add to that real quickly. Some of Carolina's upcoming games, for example, Duke is flat out better than Carolina in football this year. I think State, not as wide a margin, but State is a better football team than Carolina. This Friday night, for example, I don't think Cal is head and shoulders different than Carolina. But more intriguing to me than the personnel, where I'll say, yeah, the Bears are I'd rather have their roster by a little bit, but not night and day, right? The bigger question beside the X's and the O's or the personnel to me is, how hard are the Tar Heels going to try? Do they play for each other? Do they play for their coaches? Do they play? I mean, this is a little bit outdated, but do you play for the name on the front of the jersey instead of the name on the back of the jersey? That's a really low bar, but I'm not sure we know the answer to that question as the Tar Heels travel 2,400 miles. I mean, if you're ever going to be zapped and not in the mood to empty the effort bucket, that's the set of circumstances. So we don't know that. But one thing we do know is that on the list, I'll add to Brendan's list of things that Mike Lombardi and Bill Belichick have to recalibrate. It is okay in modern college football if the head coach does not have a lot of warm, fuzzy relationships with his players. But it is not okay for a staff to treat players like 30-year-old men with families who, I mean, it just doesn't work that way. One of the reasons, the genius of Mac Brown could be summarized a lot of different ways. Winningest coach in UNC football history. I was there when he had them in the national top 10, back-to-back years. That's happened, once in my lifetime, and I was there to see it, right? 96 and 97. The genius is a combination of things. He knows how to identify high-level talent, and recruit them in a way where somehow he waves a magical personality wand and makes Carolina football like a place to be. Not for everybody, but for enough dudes that Drake May turned down Alabama and Sam Howell turned down Florida State. Those are in-state guys with super heavyweight offers, and they played for the Tar Heels. Part 2 of Mac's magic was, and Brendan was there to see this happen, probably in the room at the time, Kamen Rucker, one of the best players on last year's team, is the only player I've ever seen in 39 years of going to these events who stood to the side when Mac and the players were on the podium in that big ballroom at Media Day. And I don't remember the context, but Kamen Rucker wanted the world to know and said out loud, Coach Brown, I love you. I love you. Again, it doesn't have to, Bill Belichick doesn't have to be Mac Brown. He's going to do it his way. Hey, Tom Brady would tell you that Bill Belichick in whatever number of years almost never said, hey, Tom, thank you. You're a great quarterback. We won a lot of games together. Here's your pat on the back. He didn't even do that with Brady. Read some quotes from Tom Brady's dad about the dysfunction of that relationship. Well, 18 to 23-year-olds, man, we were all that age at one point. It doesn't hurt.
Yeah, you kind of need it a little bit. Like
speed in practice, and you're reading these negative. It doesn't hurt to say good play. Hey, we just got our butts beat, but Brendan, you filled that hole. You filled the A gap the way you're coached to do, and that's why that runner got 1 yard instead of 9. Just something like that.
Everybody
it doesn't
loves
have to be
encouragement.
Belichick, but it does have to come from somewhere, or they're really misguided about the nature of college football in more ways than one.
So Carolina, we'll see what they did to hit Cal on Friday night here on the West Coast. Welcome to the 2025 ACC, where Carolina versus Cal is a conference game on a Friday night. Over 8 miles down the road, though, things a little bit better in Durham. The Duke Blue Devils 3-0 in conference play, 4-2 overall. They've won their last 3 games. I got a chance to talk to one of my favorite former players from East Forsyth, Quayshawn Brown. Q came to homecoming at East Forsyth on Friday. We interviewed him at halftime. I'll try to have that for everybody to listen to tomorrow on tomorrow's show when I have Mark Pruitt come in from Winston Journal to preview our top Big 3 high school football games. Duke sits with 3 other teams. The surprising, I still say surprising, number 12th ranked Georgia Tech Yellow Jackets 3-0 in conference play, 6-0 overall, ranked number 12 in the country. The 18th ranked Virginia Cavaliers are also 3-0. And SMU Mustangs are 2-0. I didn't realize it, but Miami, who's up to number 2 in the rankings this week in the AP poll, they're 5-0 overall. They've only played 1 conference game, and that was against FSU. They 4 of their 5 games have been at home so far. They've won, 5, but they're 4-0 at home, 1-0 on the road. They're going to start getting some road games here soon, so we'll see what Miami's about. But my question to both of you, we'll start off with you, Brendan, because you report on the team. What are the odds of Duke making it to the ACC championship game with what they have in front of them and what they've done so far?
Yeah, I mean, in the vacuum of the triangle, to me, Duke is clearly the best of the 3 teams. And I think it's a fascinating comparison, especially compared to, the saga we were just talking about with Belichick at UNC. You had Mike Elko 2 years ago, or however many years ago, 4 years ago. He comes in and immediately flips things. Manny Diaz comes in, you get a quarterback, you stabilize things. And, I think Mensa has proven that Duke's investment was sound. And for Duke football to be willing to make that investment, Des, I don't know if you realize this, Duke spent more in football spending last year per public records that are filed to the government per Department of Education data than North Carolina did. Wow. So Duke's investment in football is real, and it has paid off. And we were talking off air. We'll see what happens with the Penn State situation, and could Coach Diaz potentially be involved in that mix? We'll see. But I think you look at what Mensa is doing. You look at what they've proven to be able to do. Clean the clocks at Syracuse. The one thing that does give me some pause, even though you talk about some of those teams going on the schedule, a couple of those ranked teams Duke still has left on the schedule. And, Georgia Tech, I think, is still underrated. Virginia, I think, is incredibly underrated and is kind of a model of like what you wanted from a modern team building perspective. You hire a young up-and-coming coach, you give them a couple of years of bandwidth. Obviously, they had a tragedy there. And then you pour money into the roster. Virginia making an 8-figure investment in the roster. That's how you get to be number 19 in the country. So can Duke make the ACC championship game? Yes. Would I predict that to happen just because of the daunting nature of their schedule that's left? Let's not forget Clemson is still like Have they underperformed? Yes, but the talent is there.
I can't figure Clemson out. I can't. It's so frustrating watching them. It's like, what happened? Like to this.
It is, but also Duke goes on the road for that game, right? So,
yeah.
I mean, playing in Death Valley is no joke. So I think you put all those things together, and again, like of the 3 triangle football teams, I would really rather than anybody else be in Manny Diaz's shoes. I do find it hard just with the schedule that's left, and for as good as Mentz has been playing, it's still hard for me to say yes, Duke over the likes of a Georgia Tech or Virginia is going to be there with Miami in the AC title game.
I like that you mentioned Manny Diaz potentially being up for that Penn State job, which is going to be the most coveted job in college football when they do fill it. I've been hearing actually our good buddy Matt Rule, David Glenn, from his time at Penn State. The AD there was the AD, I think, at Temple when he was the coach at Temple. I think they vacationed together, so it's probably going to be.
Yeah. They're among each other's best friends.
Yeah, so I'm thinking Matt Rule's going to get a call if you hadn't already about, hey, you interested in doing this and doing that? Same question for you. You've seen enough of Duke now, especially in person, DG. Your thoughts on Duke? You think they can handle the Georgia Techs, the Virginias at the top of the ACC standings here? Can they get to the ACC championship game? Can they be ACC champion?
I've been on the Duke bandwagon since the summer. I thought they'd be the best team in the state again. I think they are that. It is hard to, I have the same hesitation, it sounds like Brendan does, to just kind of say, yeah, it's going to be the Blue Devils against so-and-so in the ACC title game. Here's why. We all know the old saying in football, defense travels. The Miami Hurricanes are so much better this year than they were last year when they went 10-3. But it was like asking Cam Ward to wave a magic wand and win 52-49. Like, that's not sustainable in the long run. Miami's got some dudes on defense now. And I think Miami's going to be one of the 2 teams in Charlotte at that ACC title game. The other one, I mean, could it be Duke? It could. Could it be UVA? It could. Could it be Georgia Tech? It could. I love watching all 3 of them play. I mean, there's a half a dozen good quarterbacks in this league, but Chandler Morris of UVA, Darian Mensah of Duke, and in a much different way, the Haynes King guy at Georgia Tech. Like, if you just like toughness and winning, Haynes King is your guy. And if you like a little mix of running and throwing, Morris is your guy. And I think Mensah might be, even as a new guy transferred from Tulane, he might be the best pure passer in the Atlantic Coast Conference right away in year 1 under Manny Diaz. Like, all the things Coach Diaz said attracted the Devils on tape to Darian Mensah. He's already been voted by his teammates or was in the summer one of the team captains. That's not easy to do when you walk into a locker room as the new guy at a program that didn't have 70-some new players or whatever. They had a lot of returnees, and I think all the other captains are returnees, as you would guess. So anyway, I think Duke does have a legitimate chance, but those schools I mentioned, Georgia Tech, Virginia, Duke, none of the 3 is great on defense. And whereas Miami knows it's going to be tough to play on defense every single week, the Devils could lose to somebody that they're better than. So could Virginia. So could Duke could beat Georgia Tech this weekend for this exact reason. When you're not sure what you have on defense, you're going to win some games you probably shouldn't, and you're going to lose some you probably shouldn't. And that's what makes it unpredictable, which I guess you could say also makes it kind of fun, because odds are we're finally going to have an ACC champion not named, Clemson 9 times, Florida State 4 times, and Pitt got the other 1. So that's 3 schools in 14 years. It's not going to be most likely not going to be one of those 3. So we'll see a new face raising the trophy in Charlotte in December.
And we thought early on that we might finally, after 20 years, finally get Florida State, Miami in the ACC championship game. And then Florida State fell off a cliff. They've lost 3 straight. They're 0-3 in ACC play. The matchups for this week, number 2 Miami taking on Louisville. That's another home game for Miami. 7:00 on Friday on ESPN. Carolina at Cal. That's a 10:30 p.m. game. So ESPN's got an ACC network doubleheader Friday.
ACC night. After dark.
And I've said my piece. I know they're not going to change it. I hate when college football schedules on Friday. I feel like Friday should be for high school football, but college football has kind of started slowly but surely just taking over Friday, even Thursday nights. Now there's playing wherever they want to, except for Sunday. They stay away from that. Saturday, October the 18th, you got 12th ranked Georgia Tech at Duke. That's a 12 o'clock kickoff on ESPN. SMU at Clemson is an interesting one. That's 3:30 p.m. on ACC Network. You got Florida State at Stanford. That's 10:30 p.m. on ESPN. And Pittsburgh at Syracuse at 7:30 on ACC Network. The CW game is Washington State at number 18 Virginia. So interesting slate of games in the ACC. this upcoming weekend. Before we get Brendan out of here, of course, I needed to talk to you a little bit about Heels and Blue Devils hoops, because it's 3 weeks away for the start of the 2025-26 college basketball season. And I was telling you off camera, and I was telling DG, I'm 47 years old. I've been a Carolina fan since as long as I can remember. So 40 plus years, I've been a diehard Carolina hoops fan. This is the first year I can really think of, other than maybe the first year of like Tyler Hansborough and that group that came in like 06, I think it was, like after the national championship, where everybody kind of left or graduated or got drafted, and it was a crop of freshmen that came in. This is a little different at Carolina this year, where it's mainly portal. It's all like portal transfer. And you've got some freshmen that are coming in that I'm a little aware of, but I haven't seen them yet. Seth Trimble is really the only player I'm familiar with on this roster, and you report on this roster on a daily basis. So explain to me why I need to be excited about Carolina hoops, or explain to me why I should not be excited about Carolina hoops going into this season, because I see some things, I'm hearing some things. The foreign player that they brought in, the Luka kid, it sounds like he's going to be really fun to watch, but until I see it, I don't know exactly what I'm looking at here. Tell me from what you've seen and what you've reported on, starting off with Carolina hoops, because Duke is kind of an established, we kind of know we're going to get there. We're used to not knowing the roster until we see them a couple of times. Not for Carolina. Like, Carolina fans are freaking out. Like, we don't know what to do with our basketball team. They came in at 25 in the AP poll, the preseason poll that just came out. Purdue #1 for the first time in school history for them. I think Duke is at 6, if I'm not mistaken. Start me off here with Carolina. Give me something that I need to be paying attention to when we start off here early on that I may not be aware of, that's a new roster member, or however you want to put it here.
Yeah, no, you're definitely right. It is, total turnover. Seth Trimble's the only, somewhat rotation player back.
Scary.
James Brown. Well, is it scary? Is it scary? Because North Carolina underachieved last year.
That's true. Actually, you know what? That's why I brought you on, Brendan, because you know how to talk me up. Keep going.
And, well, I'm just saying, the roster construction last year, I'll tell you a story. You'll appreciate this. I remember talking to Hubert Davis this summer, and, talking about last year and how frustrating it was at times with their lack of size. And, that horse has been beaten. But he was telling me, I remember standing in a huddle during a timeout at Maui. I think they were playing against Michigan State. And he says, I'm standing up, I'm 6'5", and I'm looking down at all 5 players I have on the court. And as a 6'5" head coach, that's not where you want to be. And so I think for fans who were scarred by that experience, that is going to be the opposite case this year for North Carolina. UNC is going to be gigantic. Henry Vesar comes in from Arizona. I think he's going to be the best defensive big man of the Hubert Davis era so far. He's a legitimate 7-footer. He's a future pro to me. He's going to allow UNC to do a lot more, like, versatility-wise and ball screen coverages than they've traditionally done under Hubert. So that's interesting. And then you pair him with a guy, you mentioned some of those freshmen, a top 10 recruit in Caleb Wilson, who is, by all means, the best pro player Hubert Davis has had since he became the head coach in North Carolina. This guy is 6'9", 7-foot wingspan. I would venture to say he is as athletic or more so than Seth Trimble, which is saying something. Yeah. Defensively, incredible instincts. But offensively, he's going to grab it and go. He can push the ball. He's an underrated passer. Not really an outside shooter, but that front court in and of itself could be one of the best, biggest defensive front courts, not just in the ACC, but in the entire nation. You mentioned the foreign guy, Luka Bogovac, comes over from Montenegro. I think there is a not 0% chance that he ends up being the best offensive player on this team. His shot is incredible. He plays incredibly under control. Seth Trimble is going to be one of North Carolina's primary guards. To me, I think by the end of the year, Luka Bogovac will be North Carolina's de facto point guard. His vision, his ability to navigate pick and rolls, this is a top 25 roster, Des. It really is. Now, it costs top 10 money, but it's a top 25 roster. It's a roster that can compete to be a top 4 seed in the ACC. And it's a roster that I think can make the second weekend of the NCAA tournament. And quite frankly, given the investment in this roster and given the inconsistency under Hubert Davis so far, this team probably needs to win games in the NCAA tournament if Hubert Davis is going to continue on as North Carolina's head coach.
And that was going to be my question for you, DG. You've been covering North Carolina and the ACC for years. Do you feel like Hubert Davis is like a prove-it year for him? Because this is the most up and down start of a coaching career you could possibly think of. You're up 16 points in the national championship game. You retire Coach K. You beat Duke in the Final Four. You're national coach of the year. Then you miss the NCAA tournament. You come back to next year with a 1 seed, you lose early. Last year was a disaster, really, in terms of Carolina expectations for the Hoops team. Do you feel like Hubert's on a hot seat going into the season, or do you think he's got a longer leash than what people may think internally?
I think there's a little room on that leash, but if he doesn't make the NCAA tournament with this roster, then all bets are off, right? And I underline what Brendan said this time as well. I think that was a great overview. My question to follow up with that is, who are your best players at Carolina? Because I see a lot of good players, that I can see as functional role players in the Atlantic Coast Conference. But we're in a world now, because college basketball is older, that fewer freshmen are superstars. In fact, on the 15-man All-ACC team last year, there were only 2 true freshmen, and they were both NBA lottery picks, Cooper Flagg and Con Knippel, both of Duke, obviously.
Top 5 picks.
Caleb Wilson was a top 10 high school senior. Is he that good? Is he that good the way we know Cam Boozer at Duke, the big man, is going to be an All-ACC player? You can bet the ranch, the farm, and the dog. He's not a Cooper Flagg level player, but he's going to be one of the best players in this league as a true freshman. Can Luka, as a 22-year-old freshman, be one of the better players in this league, whether as that de facto point guard later or as just a sweet shooting, guy could shoot 90% from the line, 40% from three-point land. He's got a stroke, and he's 22 years old. How great is he? Henry, the big guy inside, absolutely will be great defensively. How great will he be offensively? At Arizona, he often came off the bench. He was not a superstar two-way player for the Wildcats. And then you got to have a functional point guard, whether it's later Luka or, Kyan Evans was a very good player at Colorado State who was peaking at the end of last year and had 100-plus assists in that role. But he's not a 2-to-1 or 3-to-1 assist turnover ratio guy unless he's gotten a lot better. So Hubert has some fair questions all over that roster. But I'll say this. When football season started at Carolina and Carolina fans were telling me they were going to go 9-3, my answer was, you got a better chance of going 3-9 than 9-3.
You did. You were back in the summer. You were telling me.
Yes, Carolina's basketball floor is much higher than that. It's just a matter of whether they're going to be good, which they will be, or at Carolina you're supposed to be better than good, and you're not supposed to be on the bubble. But I think Hubert's regular season ACC title year before last earned him some street cred to go with that national title game trip 2 years prior. If the title game trip were the only jewel on his resume, and that's 2022, I think he'd be in a more fragile place. But it was year before last that he went to the Sweet 16 and went 17-3 to finish in first place in the ACC and post that regular season banner, if you will. So I don't see it. I don't see him as on the hot seat as we enter the season, but you got to reserve the right to change your mind if things go sideways quickly.
I do think that it feels like, with the emphasis on height, and Brendan's story adds to this too, I do think Hubert's going to go back to running 2 bigs. He kind of went away from that last year, almost an experiment to see if they could kind of outrun teams or whatever. But to Brendan's point, if the coach is taller than the 5 kids he's got out there in the huddle, that's probably a problem. There was so many games last year where I was just frustrated because teams were just playing like volleyball with the ball over top of our heads, literally just throwing it over top of us. And I'm like, how are we playing with 3 kids that are 6'4" or shorter at Carolina? Carolina is known to run big, multiple bigs, and have a 3rd big come off the bench. I think he's going to get back to that and much longer, the Jaren Stevensons of the world, the longer armed guys, those defenders. He's got multiple players that are built in that mode. So I think that'll help out too. It's just weird knowing that Seth is the only one really that's what he is really. And James Brown, I've heard James Brown has had kind of a body transformation from last year to this year. We'll see if he's able to contribute, but he was some height they could have used last year and just couldn't get on the floor. Seth is really the only one that had meaningful minutes over the course of his career at Carolina that's back. So he's the de facto leader of this team. So we'll see how they do. And we'll get more and more into Carolina as we get closer to the season. I can't escape Duke basketball before we get out of here. Is Duke a national contender this year? Because they've flipped their roster as well, but they do this every year, and they've been ahead of the curve in terms of having a GM, having things in place. They're about 3 years ahead of Carolina in terms of when they started doing it. And this year, Carolina now has a GM, and they're doing the same stuff now too. So we'll see if it translates the same way as it did in Durham. But your thoughts on Duke, and does this team have potential to go further than last year's team that was loaded with 2 top 5 overall picks in Conconapple and Cooper Flag? Like, do you feel like it's a better constructed team or more the same from Durham?
Yeah, it would be hard to be better than last year's Duke team. That Duke team, to me, quite frankly, was an all-timer. I think we're going to look back. John Shire is going to look back on that team the way that Coach K looks back on 99. That was the one. That was the one that got away.
Yeah.
You had the best player in the country. You mentioned Knipple too. You also had another top 10 pick in Malawach. The entire starting 5 gets drafted. I think that was only the second time in the last 20 years that's happened. I mean, it was just an unreal assortment of talent. Like, truly a foolish lineup to have been constructed at the college level. This team, that's an unfair. I say all of that because it is unfair to expect this team to be as good as last year's team. Now, can this year's team make it back to the Final Four? Absolutely. Could this team potentially go further? I would say yes, but only because the top of college basketball overall, I do not believe will be as strong as it was last year. You had all number 1 seeds in the Final Four last year, only the second time that had ever happened. In any given year, any of the 4 final teams last year would have been by far and away the front runner to win the national championship. They would have been by far and away the best team this season. So I think there's just going to be more parity across the sport overall. And I do think Duke will be in the mix. Cam Boozer, like DG said, I mean, I voted, I'll tell you guys, I voted for ACC preseason player of the year a couple of days ago. He was my vote. And I'd be very surprised if he's not taking home that award. We're working on our preseason All-Americans at the Athletic right now. He's in the mix. I mean, he is going to be one of those guys. He's one of the ones. Potential top 5 pick. But I do think there are a lot more questions than last year. Is Caleb Foster ready to be that standout lead guard? Isaiah Evans, North Carolina kid, could have been probably a first-round pick. Opts not to transfer. Opts not to go pro. Can he be more than a shooter? What does he give you defensively? And then beyond Cam Boozer, what else can you get from this freshman class? Dame Sarr, you bring in the Italian kid who had played for FC Barcelona, got incredible physical tools. What does he look like as he's adjusting to the college game? Nick Hymenia, another, top 20 recruit. Does Shire use him in the Knipple role? Is he more of a guy who plays at the 4 alongside Boozer? There are pieces here. I just think there are more questions than there were answers last year. Again, I picked Duke to win the ACC. I think they're going to be the best team in the league. Nothing about that has changed. And the perch you're describing, Des, with them being sort of the standard in the league, that is still the case. But that doesn't mean they're going to come anywhere close to last year's team. That was a special group. And I think this year's team could have the same postseason success, but it will not be as good as last year's team.
I agree with that nod to 99 in terms of the similarities there. DG, your thoughts on Duke going into this? Because it seems like Louisville's the only one that really might challenge them in the ACC at the top of the standings, unless I'm forgetting someone, because I don't think Carolina is going to be in that top tier, but they might be there below with, like, I don't know, maybe NC State. They're going to want to smoke with Will Wade and what he's brought in. Your thoughts on the top of the ACC going into the preseason here in basketball? Is it Duke and everybody else, or are you looking at somebody else that can challenge?
Well, I do think the top tier is Duke and Louisville, and there may be a half a dozen teams on tier kind of 1B that on a given night could beat Duke or Louisville, but it starts with the Cardinals and the Blue Devils in whatever order you want to put them. I endorse Brendan's description of the fish that got away. I lived through that Coach K 1999 team. One of the biggest differences is Coach K already had 2 national titles leading into that one brilliant team where he didn't win it all. John Shire obviously is still looking for his first national title. So maybe it hurts more. Maybe it doesn't hurt as much because John Shire is such a young guy. We'll see. But my bottom line with Duke is, man, I love what they look like at 2, 3, 4, and 5. I would love to have a 3 big man rotation of Cameron Boozer, Malik Brown, and Pat Ngongba. I mean, rotating those 3 is going to be fantastic. 2 or more of the wings, whether it's Darren Harris, who was supposedly the star in his teammates' eyes during the offseason, or Isaiah Evans, or, future NBA high pick Dame Sarr, or Nick Hymenia, 2 or more of those 4 guys on the wing are going to be ready. And so that means the bottom line is point guard. If we went over all the great schools and teams and coaches we've covered, 9 times out of 10, when you have a special season, you had a special point guard. it's not always your leading scorer superstar point guard, but it is either the superstar point guard or the rock solid. You know exactly what you're going to get from him, coach on the floor type point guard. It's one of those two every time. And can Caden Boozer be that as a freshman? We're all sure that Cam Boozer can be a star big man as a freshman. That's going to happen. How good can Caden be as a freshman point guard? How good can Caleb Foster be as a junior who's never been great? Good, but never great. He's worked his tail off in the offseason. He's changed his body as well. But I think that is the unanswered question at this point. How good will Duke be at point guard when the rest of the rotation looks pretty darn good and top 10 nationally in my eyes?
I do feel like looking at that roster, Isaiah Evans is the one that I'm looking at to make a huge leap this year from where he was primarily a role player last year, but really started to come on at the end of the year defensively. I do remember that. He has a lot of key defensive stances towards the end of the year and a tournament time. This year being more of a leader role, being there a couple of years now, former prep star in North Carolina. I'm looking to see him take that next step to becoming an all ACC type player. And I feel like he's got all the tools to do it. He just had a lot of talent in front of him, especially last year. So it's kind of hard to break through with, like you said, Brendan, all the entire starting five got drafted. Like there's 3 top 10 players playing in front of you. So I feel like this year could be the year for him to do that as well. And shout out to Pat Kelsey, the head coach at Louisville. When you talk about teams having to put things together in today's NIL portal world, they have literally flipped Louisville around in a year, 2 years, like to a top 25 nationally relevant program again. And it's nice to see a blue blood like a Louisville get turned around so quickly. It makes me feel like what they're doing at Carolina can actually work because we're seeing other places do it in small bits of time. It's just a matter of, are you managing the money correctly? Do you have the right talent evaluators, things of that sort? Carolina apparently did not in football, but in basketball, I'm hoping that'll ring through. One question I want to ask you guys real quick before you get out of here, because I just saw it myself. I started thinking about it. I just saw this thing about the Big Ten closing in on a $2 billion capital agreement vote, where they're basically going to be infusing league schools with more than $2 billion. The framework is going to they're going to create a new entity called Big Ten Enterprises. It'll hold all the league-wide media rights and sponsorship contracts. So they'll be the ones negotiating the next Big Ten deal. But by doing this, it's basically going to make it where they're probably not going to make any further expansion anytime soon. And they're probably not going to be able to leave for like a super league or something in football. Is this something you could see the ACC doing in order to compensate for the lack of money that they're getting from their football rights deals compared to the Big Ten and the SEC? And me and DG, we've talked about this in terms of the expectation of getting the same amount from the football is never going to happen because the ACC is not on the same level of football as the SEC and Big Ten. But they have other things that they can, bring the value of the brand of the conference up. Is this something the ACC should look into if the Big Ten does all of this? And that way you've got this new entity that will be controlling the media rights for the ACC and everything else, and more money for these schools in particular. Is that something you would want them to pursue? Or is this something that the Big Ten is doing is just like crazy talk and you don't understand why they're doing it and it's just money getting thrown around all over the place? Is this something that's going to be like a new model going forward, do you think, for these Power Fours?
I'll be real quick on this. I mean, to be frank with you guys, the ACC has flirted with this in the past. They have looked at private equity options, and some of the universities individually have looked at private equity options. And ultimately, the thing that a lot of them have come back to is like, okay, where do we – like, what's the payout? Like, how do we give the ROA back? And there hasn't really been an answer to that question. As far as the football gap is concerned, like you said, Des, like they're never going to close it all the way. I do think that there has been great success with what the ACC did as far as their strategic brand initiatives and their success initiatives. You do get paid out for your TV slots and your TV viewership numbers. You do get paid out for success on the field. There are going to be ACC schools this year, especially ones like a Miami who are at the top of the conference in both statistics. They're going to be making over $50 million in terms of revenue on the football side of things. That puts you in the competitive ballpark with the SEC and the Big Ten. Quite frankly, I think that's a model that the SEC and the Big Ten are probably going to end up stealing rather than later. There's still a lot of talk about Super League. There's still a lot of talk about, 2030 as sort of when everything falls apart, just because of the way the TV contracts have lined up. The ACC settlement obviously makes that the exit point for everything. I hesitate to say that private equity will catch on widely. we keep going to Congress and private equity trying to solve problems that college sports has created for itself. I do think you're looking at some more flexibility with things the ACC has tried probably before you go down that avenue more fully.
DG, real quick,
Yeah,
same thing.
my short answer is, as a guy who started practicing contract law as an attorney in 1994, the devil is in the details, because I've had people who wanted to invest in my various sports media ventures that I've owned over the years. And the first question I always ask is, what do you expect your input to be? Do you expect to have decision-making power? What happens if things go sideways? What happens if things go well? Because I'm a trained attorney, I know all the questions to ask on the front end. And by the time you're done churning it out with, and I mean a good faith person who's trying to listen and be fair, a lot of times you just can't come to the agreement. Because of when you hash it out on the front end, trying to avoid, collisions and nastiness on the back end, stuff it's harder to settle. In the Big Ten case, I'm intrigued about the details because it's not pure private equity. I don't know if they gave up a lot of control. Now, I can tell you again from personal experience, if you say you have a lot of money laying around and you believe in DG's latest enterprise and you're not going to ask many questions and you'd like me to try to make you some money, I'm pretty amenable to that. But again, the devil is in the details, because especially when things don't go as swimmingly as we all hoped on the front end, what's written into the contract really, really matters. And in the private equity world, man, that little corner of the universe is famous for not always knowing how an industry works. They don't always care how an industry works. They want their return, period. And often they want to do things that upset how you choose to do things as a college sports administrator. And that's why I would be a really, really hesitant person in the room asking a lot of really specific questions before I got into bed with somebody the way the Big Ten appears to be doing right now.
Yeah, and we'll see what goes on with it, because if they do it and it actually works, I can't see the SEC not doing this. And then if that happens, I can't see the ACC exploring some way to keep up with the Joneses, I guess, because it's all it's going to do is just infuse even more money into college athletics and college football in particular. But we'll keep an eye on that as that's going on too. I've kept you all way longer than I meant to. Everybody, finish your Lunchables, get out of the cafeteria and go back to your cubicles. Everybody, go back to work. We'll be back tomorrow with a brand new episode. Mark Pruitt from Winston-Salem Journal will help us preview the Big Three, the top big high school football games in the Triad this upcoming Friday. And I think we have 4 games this upcoming Friday live simultaneous, so we'll get you info on that. And hopefully we'll get it all together. Quayshawn Brown, starting wide receiver at Duke, former East Forsyth standout. We had an exclusive interview with him over the weekend as well. So for Brendan Marks, for David Glenn, this is Desmond Johnson. You've been watching and listening to the Desmond Johnson Show here on Tobacco Road Sports Radio. We'll see you guys on Wednesday.